One of the things I want to do so that we don't get too caught up in the weeds, it's okay if we get in the weeds in a little bit, but so that we don't get too caught up in the weeds, while my guess is that many of my listeners are going to already know or have kind of a semi understanding of what EMF is, let's go ahead and describe, if you don't mind, Brandon, what EMF is. So let's just describe that. And then why is there any reason for us to be concerned or even be talking about this thing that is EMF in regards to our health?
Well, what it is fairly simple. EMF, or electromagnetic fields or electromagnetic frequencies, are simply an energy that's usually wirelessly transmitted through the use of radio waves, different spectrums of energy on the electromagnetic spectrum. So these are radiated from not only the electricity running through your walls, but Wi-Fi, routers, computers, mobile phones, even microwaves, something that some people still cook their food with, contains microwave radiation. And some of the more dangerous forms of EMF, you hear about dirty electricity, you hear about all of these things. One of the most pernicious and really egregious types of energy that are in the environment currently are the cell phone towers and the microwave radiation acting as a carrier signal to basically make it so you can make a cell phone call.
Yes, thanks for going over that. Yeah, so a lot of people, just kind of recap, these are radio frequencies, these are magnetic fields, electric fields, and dirty electricity. And I would also recommend, if you have not or want a kind of just basic primer, a very down-to-earth, easy-to-understand book, one of my favorite ones is by a guy named Nicholas Pinault, which is the Non-Tinfoil Guide to EMF. So if you really just want a very basic understanding, into my listeners there, I'll link to this in the show notes, but I like this as just a easy to go to primer on all things EMF and EMF mitigation. So that's great. Well, awesome, Brandon. Why, one of the things that I always, get questions about is that we hear kind of information from these telecommunication companies on how, there's no reason to be afraid of any type of cellular signals that are coming through, into our households, into our cell phones, and kind of in the news, we hear these things of like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't put the cell phone up close to our head, but in general, it's really not that big of a deal. Is that something you agree with, or would you disagree with that inherently?
It's certainly a big deal. We're essentially, on the physical level, electromagnetic water machines. We're very influenced by electrical signals in the environment, and our mitochondria, which is bacterial in nature, has evolved to kind of sense changes in electrical currents, in magnetism, in light, in temperature, and that's how our cells and body and DNA essentially at the core levels is regulated. So there's numerous things to be concerned about when it comes to EMF, and not trying to come from a fear-mongering perspective, but it's fairly basic physiology. Some of the most well-known and documented studies and the journals are, relate to the calcium channels and relate to how we have this flood of excess calcium in the voltage-gated calcium channels. So there's that component, which is, relates to anxiety, depression, all of these kind of stuff. But if you take a child, and a child is using a phone which has a very much more thin skull or insulation or protection from these frequencies or this energy, a 2-minute call can alter a child's brain function for an entire hour. Mm-hmm. It causes leakage in the blood-brain barrier. It damages and breaks living DNA. So when you talk about micronucleosis, or these cell fragments that break off DNA that don't actually die, but they start to reform, yet they have mutations and things of this nature, you're going to see quite a bit more like cancer unfolding over the years. And what's unfortunate in a lot of respects is that it's some people feel everybody's on a different level of the bell curve as far as like how they perceive this energy and how it affects them. Some people have a really strong constitution and genetic predispositions to where they can handle a lot of stress, physically, emotionally, mentally, so on and so forth. And, there's other people that don't fare so well and almost have kind of like an allergic reaction to these repetitive frequencies of non-native radiation. So, the list is sky high as far as like the ramifications, but it's not always instant. People can't always feel it right away, but 5, 6, 7 years down the road, you've had that, that Bluetooth earbud in your ear, and then all of a sudden that that heating of the tissue in that localized area starts growing in a way it shouldn't, you start kind of making connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is a huge distinction for us to make, because a lot of people, unless you're just extremely electrosensitive, a lot of people, if they put a Bluetooth, device in their ear, they're wearing their Apple AirPods, whatever they're called, in their ears. Initially, they may not experience anything, but the problem is that we don't have really good research to show what are the long-term effects on this from these devices that we're using, that we put in air quotes are, quote, safe, end quote, which we know that, actually we do have some studies to demonstrate that these aren't as safe as we may believe that they are. But I think that the unfortunate thing that's going to end up happening is that as time goes by, we're going to get more and more data coming in demonstrating how deleterious these effects of EMF truly are for us. And then at that moment, that's when we'll start making change. Or we may not even make change. We may attribute it to something else. Maybe it wasn't the EMFs. Maybe it was something else within the technology that was doing it. Or maybe it wasn't the technology of itself. We just kind of push it aside. And that's kind of the scary aspect of technology and kind of and the power that these companies hold, because they have the ability to manipulate data. And we've seen it happen in the past. One of the websites that I really love, that if people have not visited to it, I'll link it in the show notes, is the EMF portal. So emf-portal.org, which you will see tons and tons of studies that's up to date. I mean, I think they update it daily on the negative effects of non-native EMF on the body. And yeah, it's crazy. So we'll jump in more to the biological effects here in just a second. But one thing I also want to make a distinction about is the difference between non-native EMF and native EMF, because I don't want people to go around thinking that all EMF are bad, because that is untrue. So would you mind kind of giving an explanation of non-native EMF versus native EMF?
Sure. Non-native EMF that's created artificially through modern technology differs in a lot of ways from magnetic fields, electromagnetic energy in nature. So everything that you see in nature, the light spectrum, birds, insects, animals, ocean waves, everything correlates with a specific frequency set, and it has a certain cadence and a rhythm to it, which is always changing, which is really important to note that a lot of these frequencies that we're exposed to with Wi-Fi, they're repetitive signals and or chaotic. So you have, fundamentally, if we break it down to yin and yang theory, there's like chaotic energy or randomization, and then there's coherence and or symbiosis in nature. So a lot of these frequencies that are man-made are chaotic. Like, for example, if you look at an information carrier wave, which is the signal transmitted to carry your cell phone message across time space, that vibrates around 800 to 2200 megahertz. So that in and of itself doesn't necessarily affect the body in a negative way. At least that's been debated. But what is disruptive to the cellular biology and cellular communication is that information carrier wave has piggybacked signals on it, which is your information that you're putting on that. That is chaotic to the cells, and that's the body tries to fight it like it would a virus. It mounts an immune response and tries to attack it. So, energies in nature, there's types of radiation that are not good. I mean, we're flying through photon belts all the time, and as we travel through the galaxies, our planet's never in the same point in time space, and your body's never the same ever. That's why you can write your signature 2,000 times and try and get one of them to match up under a microscope. You're actually literally a different person every second, every moment. But these frequencies don't change. They don't move, and they don't pulsate or oscillate in the same way that frequencies do in nature. And I know that gets a little bit technical, but essentially these repetitive frequencies are our body and cells haven't evolved with. So our body tries to kind of mount an immune response to them versus, if you go into nature and you're having this variety of frequencies, it's kind of the difference between a super nutrient or a multivitamin or something of that nature. Your body requires all these different nutrients. You wouldn't just eat like magnesium, vitamin C and expect to be healthy. But what's happening on the electromagnetic level with a lot of these frequencies from non-native EMF is that we're getting stimulated with the same thing over and over, which eventually causes damage and again mounts an immune response to where the body tries to protect itself against that repetitive barrage on the cell level.
Excellent. So it's kind of like I kind of like share the analogy of exercise or any other type of hormetic stressor that would be good for us. And I won't even say non-native EMF will be good for us, but the idea is that acute stressors don't necessarily have as much of a negative effect on us as these chronic long-term stressors do. And so from an evolutionary or ancestral perspective, we didn't have all of these non-native EMFs like we do nowadays in our modern day, especially American, well, I'd say international lifestyles too, but especially in kind of these developed countries like America, this constant barrage of this non-native EMF, which is very different than what our biology is used to. So we wouldn't exercise, for hours on end because we know that acute stressor would turn into something chronic, which would then have a deleterious or negative effect on our mind and on our body. But the problem is that we are constantly being berated by this stressor that's unbeknownst to many people. They don't know that they're actually being exposed to a stressor that is inherently speaking to their biology. Am I hearing you correct on that?
Thanks for listening to the Hanu Health Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. This podcast would not happen without listeners and supporters like you. And the best way to support us and the show is to head on over to iTunes and provide us with a 5-star review. This helps us reach others and spread the good word of breathing and stress resiliency. If we read your 5-star review on air, please reach out to podcast@hanuhealth.com with your name and mailing address, and we will send you some sweet Hanu gear. Until next time, breathe better and stress less.